Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ty Fischer, the host of Cultivate, and we have a real treat for you today. Ned Bustard's here. Ned is a great friend. He's a graphic designer, children's book illustrator, author, and printmaker. He's the creative director for World's End Images and Square Halo Books. He curates the Square Halo Gallery. He's an elder at Wheatland Presbyterian Church, and he serves on the boards of the Association of Scholars of Christianity in the History of Art and the Row House. Hey, Ned.
Hello, friend.
And we're going to talk about beauty, and we're going to talk about what should be involved in an education to help children, and maybe even adults could grow in this, right? Help them love the beautiful. Isn't that a great topic?
I think we can talk about that through this podcast and the next one and the next one,
Yeah.
and then probably 12 after that.
This podcast is only going to be 73 hours.
Well, if we have to cut it, we have to cut it. What are we going to do?
Yeah. So, Ned, before we get started, let's just take the big issue on head on. Defining beauty can be a real challenge. So when I ask that question, what is beauty? What do you think?
I think you need to talk to somebody else, because I was thinking about this because I knew that we were going to be talking about the idea of beauty, and I feel kind of like a bagger at Target, and someone comes up and says, now tell me exactly where you get all the Legos and about shipping and the manufacturing. And I'm like, I'm just putting them in the bag, man. That's all I'm doing. I'm putting them in the bag. I know that I like Legos, so I'm putting them in the bag. And I feel that when it comes to beauty, I just love it, and I want to talk about it and think about it. What it is, people have been talking about this for millennia, right? The Greeks, the Romans, everybody's been talking about this. I think that it's a hard thing to get your head around. I've been personally reading about it for my entire adult life. I'm still struggling with it. We've got the idea of harmony and order and symmetry, that there's that kind of camp of beauty. But then I've just been reading a book recently called The Father of Lights, A Theology of Beauty by a friend of ours, Eunice Johnson. He says that beauty is a moment in which we are reminded of God. And I think he gets some of this from Pope John Paul. He has a letter to artists, which is really a great read. Very short for folks who have a short attention span too, but who says that beauty of created things is never fully satisfies. It stirs a hidden nostalgia for God. And I think that is, for me, when I think about beauty, we tend to go to the golden mean. And so that's beauty. But then you start working that out or seeing other examples of things and you're like, well, it doesn't quite add up necessarily. Like you think about C.S. Lewis's whole discussion about joy, and he was longing for this thing that didn't quite fit. Was it 1.34 whatever the golden mean is? It didn't fit. That there's something to beauty, and I think ultimately to truth and goodness that is beyond what we understand, and it's something that draws us, as Lewis talks about joy, being drawn to this thing that was beyond him. And I think that whether my friend Junius is right or not, or Pope John Paul II was right, I think that there is an aspect of not so much the Greek idea that there's the Platonic, the perfect chair out there, and we're looking for the perfect chair, but that we serve a God who is the creator of all things and is outside of time, and there's this macroness of who he is that we are being drawn to. And I think that beauty is part of that.
Well, and I forget which of your books we were sitting around talking about once, but we talked about how our culture sometimes can fend off truth, and it's really turned goodness on its head, but we don't really have a great defense against beauty.
Right. Yeah, that was one of my favorite conversations you and I had early on. I think it was for It Was Good Making Art to the Glory of God, though I think I ended up putting it in a different one. But you had the idea of, I think you said that the bridges have been burned between us and culture. Yeah. And I think that that's a great analogy because it has been a violent action. I think that, the Romantic movement and Enlightenment, you see this breaking down of these bridges of truth and goodness. And yet then you get the beauty, and beauty gets us in ways that we're not ready for. In the It Was Good book, Tim Keller talks about this, that beauty gets to us in a way that other things can't. And that's why we may not believe in God, but then we hear Bach performed, and you're like, oh, well, rats. Something's going on that I didn't have a category for before.
Yeah, it's like what they say in boxing, it's the punches that you don't see coming that hurt you.
That hurt.
Right,
yeah.
So when we think about beauty and the educational task that we have as parents, how's beauty related to that educational task as parents? How can we educate our kids and get them to love beauty?
Well, I know that when my wife taught here, that was a real important thing for her. And I think she often jettisoned much of the things that she was supposed to be doing. What is that?
Don't tell the head of school.
Game plan. What is it when you teach your
curriculum guide?
Yeah. Well, no, you lesson plans. Yeah, she's like, well, we need to put poetry in here. We need to put art in here. So she would add those things in. I think that was great. And I think that there's an aspect of the intentionality is very important, that we realize that even if we may not understand what goodness, truth, and beauty are ultimately, we know that that's where we're going and what we're pointing to. And for our kids, we need to just plan for that. Make time for beauty.
We've been friends for many, many years. And I know that whenever I'm around you, like when I'm at your house, you've thought carefully about beauty.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're thinking
much
about...
to the chagrin of my children, a lot of times they're like, can we just enjoy this stupid movie? Or I like this song. Just because it's insipid, I still like it.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
Well, but just in you planning out how you're going to impact your own children, what were you thinking when you put a piece of artwork on the wall or something?
Oh, a lot of that was that we were thinking about the long-term kind of trajectory for our children. Something that's completely non-art related, but kind of ties into this, is that Leslie and I both grew up in Philadelphia, Wilmington area. And we went to school in Lancaster at Millersville University and ended up living here. And we love living here, but there's something about Chad's Ford. You know, it's Revolutionary War there, and there's the there's a Brandywine River Museum where a lot of the Wyeth art is. And we both grew up there. We didn't know each other at the time, but we both were impacted by that, and it got into our bones. And when we had children, we said, how do we get this love for Chad's Ford into our kids when we're living in cornfields in Lancaster County? Like, there's just nothing connecting us to Chad's Ford. So we found at the Central Park here in Lancaster, there is a Rockford plantation, and it was the house of one of Washington's generals. Yeah. And we went there and we said, oh my goodness, this is Chad's Ford. Like, just the whole aesthetic of that area. And there's the broken rock walls and the trees. And we said, this is Chad's Ford. So we went, like, every Wednesday. We were homeschooling, and we would make this part of our life. Every Wednesday we would go there and have a picnic at Rockford Plantation. And the idea was we wanted to get our kids to love Chad's Ford. And this was the closest we could do it.
So you found a beautiful place and used that beautiful place to train the tastes of your children.
Exactly.
Now, that's wonderful.
And just so that folks who are listening don't think that this is like a magical Willy Wonka ride that they're on, it was a horrible experience that we would go each week and have a horrible time. I mean, the kids did not want to go there. The dogs wanted to run off everywhere. They didn't like what we were eating. They were bickering and fighting with each other. But we kept doing it. And eventually, our kids fell in love with Chad's Ford.
Wow.
Now, it's helpful that we actually took them down to the Brandywine River Museum every once in a while. But it was an intentionality. And I think that it's tiring as young parents to be intentional because you don't see the end game. You say, well, I want it to end up good, but I just don't have the stamina. And I think that that's where a place like Veritas Academy comes in and says, I'm going to help you give your children that long, we're going to work with them over the next 10, 20 years so that they hopefully will it's possible that they end up saying, Chad's Ford is horrible. I hate it. I really want to rather be in Africa or something.
But that formation of taste that Lewis talks about in The Abolition of Man, that's one of the most important things that we do for children by reading them good stories and showing them good art. And it builds the kind of like visual vocabulary so that they know that when they meet a wolf, the wolf is bad.
Yeah, dragons are evil. And these things happen. And it's funny that we're teaching them this stuff. A lot culturally, I think, or generally, our society thinks that good taste just happens, or that you just automatically will be inclined to the right way. But we were like, actually, no. I mean, our theology would say, actually, the cards are stacked against you. And so that's why we have to be intentional.
Well, in talking about the cards being stacked against us, when have two Presbyterians gotten together to talk about beauty on a podcast? This might actually be a first.
It's certainly rare.
In the history of the church.
We're going to end up disagreeing with each other because we're Presbyterian.
That's true. But when we think about truth and goodness, it's pretty easy to connect those to God. But sometimes I think our imagination really falls short, or we don't see the close connection between beauty and God. So how are these things tied to God's being?
I think that's about three questions. One aspect of that is the fact that we don't connect God with beauty. And I think that is not necessarily the fault of educators. I think that's the fault of the church at large. I think that on the whole, the church, at least the Protestant church, most of us have kind of isolated ourselves from beauty. A lot of this goes back to Gnosticism too. We've got this idea that it's God in my brain. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about a lot of the new books that you're seeing coming out, like Drew Johnson has Human Rights and James K. Smith has You Are What You Love, that we're seeing the church starting to come back to saying, oh, wait, I am a human being. And that's actually a good thing, that God intended that. So we have this kind of, I think, a helpful new direction. But I think that's one of the reasons that we're cut off from this idea that God and beauty even get along.
Well, and you point out that we're Protestants, and that this is maybe even a problem that kind of circles around Protestantism at some points. But in some ways, we were so terrified of beauty in worship, in the place of worship, right? Visual art, especially, that what we've done is we've taken all of it out.
Well, I think there's a proverb, throwing out babies with bathwater.
Yeah.
I think that,
so we threw out icons and paintings, but when we threw them out, we just end up with like this bald, functional kind of space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Christ talks about we're going to get rid of these demons, but you got to fill up that room with
That's exactly right. And really, sometimes Protestants struggled to do that. But then, we're living in a culture where it doesn't connect beauty to the being of God. It just connects beauty to the subjective. So how can we help kids that are growing up in this culture where really all of beauty is in the eye of the beholder is basically what you're getting from the culture at large?
Yeah, I mean, and there is an aspect of, like I said, if John Paul's right, that you're going to have aspects of beauty that is in the eye of the beholder, that there's going to be something that triggers you and you say, oh, this is making me longing, giving me a longing for something.
So it's not wrong for you to see beauty in something and maybe for me to miss it and vice versa.
I would say if we agree on all of these things, there's probably a problem.
Well, but we're Presbyterians. We don't have to worry about that.
That's not going to be a problem. But I think we like to truncate reality in such a way that, okay, all three of us, all five of us, all 10 of us all agree about the same thing. When it comes to the planet, let's not even talk about the solar system or everything. God has created this amazing thing that's so far beyond, like I have no idea what the little critter is that's in the bottom of the ocean that, the God has made that's so beautiful. But there's people that see that and know that and love that beauty that they see. So I think God is so big, and the reality of being his children is so amazingly large that I'm going to find things that are beautiful that are different from what you find. Now, Matt Clark used to teach here as an art teacher. He now teaches down at Geneva.
In Orlando.
And he loves lizards and critters and all that kind of stuff. I have no interest in that at all. Negative interest in that. But because of the way he does his art, he gives me a love for these things. I'm like, oh, that's why you love that. And I think that we have a responsibility.
So you've kind of caught it from him.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's been taught to me by him. And I think that that's what we need to do for each other. I need to teach you why this band I like is the greatest rock and roll band ever. And you need to teach me why this sandwich, well, I grew up in Philadelphia. I feel it's my evangelistic mission to tell everyone what a decent cheesesteak is. Like, do you have to go through your life eating cheesesteaks? No. You can never eat one, and that's fine. But I'll tell you, I love this, and I want to tell you why I love it. And then I'm going to have to take you down to Philly because there's special breads that are made by Amorosa Rolls, and you have to have it done a certain way. This is all me sharing my love for you, but it's teaching you what I love.
Yeah. And I remember you went on a field trip to the Museum of Modern Art with a class.
That was
at
fun.
Veritas. Yeah.
That was my only time I've been there, actually.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And it was such a shockingly amazing experience. I don't know where you're going with this, but I just need to say that to go into a museum for the first time and to turn and go into a room and say, oh, there's Starry Night. Oh, it's not a poster, Starry Night. No, that's it. It was just life transforming.
I remember we were together
crazy.
at that point. But you as an artist have helped me to see and to experience some parts of the beauty of modern art that I really, growing up in rural Indiana, just didn't have a chance to interact with.
And cheesesteaks too. You didn't have cheesesteaks there either.
No cheesesteaks.
All these things.
Yeah. But I remember we went around the corner once, and the only Jackson Pollocks that I had seen were like little pieces of something in an art book. And then there's this painting, and it's a 20-foot wall.
Yeah, it was gigantic.
Yeah.
Wasn't that Autumn something? I forget.
And I'm sure that there are parts of Pollock's work that still seem strange to me and that you can probably enjoy better than I can. But it was really instructive just to come face to face with, this is what the real thing is. And there's a power in that just can't be communicated by the little postage stamp thing that you see in
the textbook. Yeah. One of the artists we've done a couple books about him, Edward Nippers. He's an artist down in Washington. He's in my It Was Good book. And he said something, I was putting one of his pictures in the book, and he said, people understand that that's just a reproduction and that has nothing to do with the real thing. And I was like, no, they actually don't know that. They think they've seen, like I've seen Starry Night. I have a little magnet of it. I have a postcard. And then I see the real thing and I'm like, there's no correlation between these two. Some colors are the same. That's about it. And I think that's, again, coming back to education, I think that's what we're doing when we sit down with our students and we say, all right, I need to read this chapter to you slowly because you're going to buzz through and say, oh yeah, I saw that on TV. Like, for example, Leslie, my wife, taught The Lord of the Rings here, and she taught the Chronicles of Narnia. And some kids would come in and say, I saw the movie, and they would not read the book. And it was the greatest fun.
Not helpful.
No, because then you realize, question 8, that's about Tom Bombadil. Sorry. A lot of what she did, and she would talk about how she would just stop and say, let's read this paragraph over again. Well, the paragraph is about them walking through the woods and the path and the leaves falling. It has nothing to do with the storyline at all. But it's that kind of work that we're doing that's helping our children develop the taste buds in their minds and souls for beauty.
Well, and how can we as educators, and how can we as parents, and then how can we as humans make sure that our eyes are open to see the beauty that's around us? Have you grown in your ability to make sure that your eyes are open, seeing what God has all around you?
That's something that I was telling someone recently, I forget who we were talking with, but I said that folks expect that because I have the word artist after my name on my business card, that's a normal thing for me. That I was, he's always going around in some rapturous glow of a glory that he's seeing all
you're
these
not?
things.
You're not?
I'm not. Actually, it was my wife who has been so helpful for me in this. And she used to teach here. Now she got cancer a couple years ago and has had to come and lives at home. Well, she lives at home anyway, but
she was living at home when she was teaching here. Just for everybody out there. Yeah.
But a lot of her time now has been made quiet. And she sits in her study and looks out the window. And she'll say, Ned, you have to come see the light coming through the window. Or I want you to see these leaves. Or some friends were very generous this past fall and treated us to a trip to Ireland. We're walking around. I'm like, Ireland, I love Ireland. My family's from Ireland. And I'm going to really get so much out of this. And I'm excited about it. And she's walking down and she's picking up weeds saying, look at this beautiful flower. I'm like, honey, that's a weed. And she's like, no, look at this. And that's what she did for her 5th graders here too. She would stop and say, wait, this is beautiful. And I think that's what has happened is God put someone in my life who said, stop and look.
Yep.
And I often
and
say that that's what artists' job is to do. That I say my job is to say, stop and look at this thing. But I don't always do that myself.
Yeah. Well, I can remember being with you. It might have been on the same field trip or a different field trip that you were with our school. And, one of the things that really struck me was that you said something like, you've got to do this slower. Mm-hmm. You've got to slow down. You're never going to really see a piece of artwork until you have the patience to wander around it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times we look at art and say, from an informational standpoint, like, oh, that's a picture of a girl sitting on a hill and there's a barn. Check, I can move on. Like, no, that's Christina's World. That's by Andrew Wyeth. We need to stop and really look at this. But that's not our modus operandi in anything in life. We're rushing to the next thing.
Well,
We're
and maybe
accumulating stuff.
And maybe worse now than it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking about it this last night as I was going through Pinterest. And I'm flipping through Pinterest like there's, I don't know, bats of hell are after me. And I'm just clicking on things and making my little board about whatever it is, art I like or something. And I thought, this is horrible. This is exactly the opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing and what I tell everyone they need to do to really engage with art. And I'm just click, 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 and I'm accumulating. It's this idea that, well, I saw it, I clicked it, I stored it, and therefore it's part of me now. It hasn't affected my soul at all. It hasn't affected my idea of goodness, truth, beauty, God, any of that. I just added it to my little board. Anyway, the slowing down, I think, is an important thing. And I think for the folks who are listening, this isn't just about art. Dale Siegenthaler used to teach math here. And I bring him up because he has a passion and a love for mathematics that almost transformed me just by walking down the hallways and seeing him, hearing him talk to people about mathematics. He and I collaborated on a piece of artwork for the juried show here, and it was about mathematics. And he just exudes this passion for something that is, let's all agree, horrible. Mathematics is horrible.
I'm not agreeing. I'm not agreeing.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my love. I'm going to share my hate so that you will be educated in my hate of mathematics. But he would create these in whatever the rhombuses or whatever, make those paper star things. And then he would have Pi Day, and he'd also do things.
We still have Pi Day, yeah.
Well, it's brilliant. I mean, let's be honest. And he would do all these examples of how math works, and you realized this is a beautiful thing that my fourth grade teacher snuffed out any passion in my heart for at all, because she didn't see this as beautiful. She didn't communicate this as beautiful. It was, or my sixth grade teacher. My sixth grade teacher would just give us dittos.
A mimeograph.
Just stacks of them. And we would just have to sit and write through that. Well, of course I hate math now. There was no love. There was no passion there.
That's what you're pointing to is what we really look for when we're looking for teachers, right?
Yeah.
Those teachers, it's all built on love. We have to be able to find those teachers that love the thing that they're teaching, because then they can start to communicate that love to their students. We're coming at this from a Christian perspective, so how do the scriptures help us to see beauty?
I don't have an answer for that.
I thought you had an answer for everything, Ned.
Yeah, I guess I did. Well, one thing I thought was with the scriptures by themselves, just their form, I think gives us a love for beauty, just the different genres. There's so much variety even in the unity of Scripture. Obviously, Scripture gives us breadcrumbs that lead us back to God.
Sure.
And I think that there's an aspect of that. And it often just tells you this matters. Like when Moses is given instructions for the tabernacle, the instructions include, we're going to do this for glory and for beauty. We're going to make the clothes and the tables and chairs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And you think, wait, does that really matter? Because you can imagine sitting around at a church meeting and say, okay, we're going to make a new building and we're going to do this part for glory and for beauty. And people would be like, what? There's no reason. We've got have a nursery, and we probably should have a coffee, little section
Coffee
too.
nook, yeah.
Yeah, because that's really important.
Put the bookshelf over here.
Maybe, but the idea that we would have for glory and for beauty, it's not part of our psyche now. It's not part of who we are culturally. But here in the Bible, it says this is actually a priority.
Right. And then you walk into the National Cathedral.
Yeah.
Right. And you go, oh, and beauty just transforms what you're seeing, what you're doing,
how you do it,
how you would do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But won't that beauty, we talk about not having a defense for beauty. Won't that turn into, especially beauty and art, turn into idolatry? How do we avoid idolatry?
I think that's a question from someone who has to pay bills. I think that we're concerned about that, but you think about all the other, Calvin says our hearts are, little factories for making idol factories. I'm happy to say yes. I'll give you that beauty can become an idol, but you're going to have to say that family can become an idol, sports teams can become an idol. I mean, there is nothing that can't be an idol. I know a guy who's obsessed with pencils. He's a friend of mine. He listens to pencil podcasts. He writes about pencils. He's a great guy. I really like him a lot. And he actually has given me some really good pencils. But what I'm saying is that any of these things can become an idol. I think that's it. I'm willing to have you say that. But beauty, if beauty's done right, now I think what I am more concerned about is beauty as a weapon. And I think that culturally, we see that happen, and I'm much more scared about that than as an idol.
Okay. So this is really fun. So when you talk about beauty as a weapon, I think that I buy your first part of the argument, which is if beauty's really that dangerous, why in the heck does God keep messing around with it, right? So it must be worth the risk for Christians to enjoy beauty because God did, and he's just keeps on making it.
He said, well, it's at least good.
Right, it's good, is what he said. But then, just like all other good things, it can be weaponized. So help us see, what does weaponized art look like?
I think the easiest thing to see is you have the beauty of a woman. And I love my wife, and I think she's gorgeous. And I think about her beauty, and it's like, oh, this is great. Then I look at what happens on TV or my Instagram feed or whatever, and I realize people have taken this beautiful thing that God has created that is, that's stunning. Like the human form, specifically the female form, is gorgeous. We all agree. Everyone agrees on that. I'm going to now use this to sell you a hamburger.
Even things worse than a hamburger.
Exactly. So I think that's where I see that we see things that are like, well, of course that's a good thing. And then it becomes a marketing tool, or even is used to actually dehumanize women. That's where I see, certainly, like I see these TikToks and reels and things that post, and I think here are people that are taking something that's beautiful and using it, I don't know, to get likes or followers or whatever, and it's completely dehumanizing that person and robbing them of the glory that God has put into them for his glory.
Yeah, so it's basically taking beauty and manipulating it to achieve power of some sort.
Yeah. And also, I think what's just struck me was how it's also used to just undermine God's beautiful plan. That we take what God has set up, these beautiful things, and we use them in a way that's not for his glory. And then it undermines, it works against God's great story that he's telling.
Yeah. It makes us either move our lives away from that story or find ourselves rowing in the opposite direction.
Oh, yeah.
Ironically, the opposite direction of the joy we could have.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you have, we mentioned hamburgers earlier. You have a McDonald's hamburger, and then you have a real hamburger. We've had, our good friend Greg would cook for us real hamburgers. And then once you've had a real hamburger, and it doesn't have to have pickles or onions on it, but it's just done right, and it's good and it's simple and it's beautiful. And then you go to McDonald's and you're like, this is not good. This is the anti-hamburger that you're selling me.
Uh-huh. So how do we make the education of children beautiful?
Well, I think one of the challenges is that we have to be willing to slow down and look for opportunities for picture studies. And so I think that there's an aspect of, are we willing to slow down? Are we willing to read the same poem 5 days in a row? Those kinds of things, it seems like a waste of time. And there's that great book, Marva Dawn has that book talking about church as a glorious waste, I think is the title. My daughter Carrie teaches at a classical school up in New York, and we've been talking about education because she's very much into that now, obviously, it's her job. And I introduced the whole idea that so much of what we do and we think about education is based on this product kind of mentality. The Henry Ford, we've got this factory, we need to just crank these things
More
through.
widgets.
More widgets, exactly. And I think that we, certainly as Christians, but as Christian educations, we have to be anti-widget oriented.
Okay.
And we have to say, am I willing to stop and slow down and say, okay, we're not going to get through everything I planned. We need to have that time built in. And that's going to be hard because we all are under the gun as far as the clock.
Well, and practically, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the repetitive patterns in Christian worship. And I was thinking about the repetitive patterns in the Christian year. By going over it again and again and again and again and again, you're able just to see all of these new layers of glory and beauty that you never would have seen if you just were doing it once.
Well, I mean, you think about, we all often see a diamond, and we turn a diamond to see the multifacets. Diamonds don't work well as two-dimensional objects. And a lot of what we're doing is saying we're going to reduce everything to a two-dimensional object.
So what can we do practically? What can we do practically to help to train ourselves and our children to be open to beauty?
I think the first thing I would think is, besides reading poetry every day, and I'm not a big poet fan, it's my wife who has shown me this, that, oh, wait, if I read this to you, I see things differently.
There's some great poetry podcasts as well that you can just kind of start your day by listening to some poetry. Right?
But I mean, and these things, we would say this as Christians, we want to encourage each other. Well, start your day reading God's word.
Sure.
Start your day reading, praying. This isn't alien kind of concept to us when it comes to spiritual disciplines, though most of us are woeful in that. But it's the same thing. Why did you get up and exercise today? Well, it's good for me. Why did you not eat McDonald's all week long? Well, it's good for me. I actually had to stop and make myself a real meal rather than going to McDonald's. And I think that that's what we need to do as parents and as educators and all this, is to say, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to make intentional decisions about the environment I live in. Like one of the fun things that we did in the past, over the past couple of years here at Veritas, was we had the juried art show where we would say, okay, we're going to stop and we're going to have artwork hung up that's about what we're doing. And there was an intentionality there. There was a lot of work that had to go into hanging artwork on the walls. It wasn't just, well, I can go down to the Education Station. That was the store that's not here anymore. But there used to be this place called Education Station. And that you could go and you could buy little strips of things that you staple onto the wall. And, oh, that's my pretty bulletin board. Okay, well, I'm glad you had fun with that. But I think that we can be doing better. And I think that it's making the time to hang that original artwork on the wall. And knowing that there's no payoff. At least you're not going to see it. The payoff is 10, 15, 20 years from now. And being willing to accept that.
Well, I always tell people what we're trying to do here at Veritas is, or people say, are you trying to make these students happy? What I would say, but I say, well, maybe I should say no, but I say yes, but we're trying to make them happy 70 years from now.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree.
We're trying to help them build a life that in the end, they sit back as an 80-year-old and go, that was a life well lived. That was beautiful.
It was not waste. Yeah, and I think that everybody around us is telling us to do the opposite of that. And so you seem crazy.
Yeah. What are some of the books that you would recommend if people want to start to dig a little bit deeper
into this topic?
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned my friend Genius Johnson's book, The Father of Lights, A Theology of Beauty. That I would recommend only if you are high octane. I mean, that's some serious philosophy. If you are wanting to just kind of dip your toes in and this is new ideas for you, I just released a book through Square Halo Books. It's Stephen Roach, and I helped write and edit it. It's called Naming the Animals, An Invitation to Creativity. And it's only like 90 pages long. It's a little 5x7 book. It's very easy to engage with. And the premise of it is basically, at Genesis 1, we were made in the image of God, and God is a creative person. So we are all creative, regardless of whether if you're a painter or an engineer. And so I would say that that's a good way to start. A lot of quotes are in there from a lot of the books I've read over the years. So it's a primer for art and faith
So that's a good starting point for laymen?
Yeah. So I guess I went backwards there. Start with that one, and if you feel that you're up to it, then go to the next one. I did come out with a book about 20 years ago. We mentioned It Was Good Making Art to the Glory of God.
That was 20 years ago?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? But that one is basically picks up where Naming the Animals left off, though I hadn't written that book yet. That says, okay, you understand about the importance of art. Now what are we going to do with it? And then I came out with 2 books after that. It Was Good Music to the Glory of God, and It Was Good Performing Arts to the Glory of God. So those would be some follow-ups. As far as some of the things we were talking about today, think about, like I kept mentioning poetry. There's a poet named Malcolm Guite, and he wrote a book called David's Crown. It's a recent collection of poems kind of based on the Psalms. He's a fantastic poet, and actually have just released a book called Lifting the Veil, Imagination in the Kingdom of God that he wrote. But that's kind of after you've read these other books, read that one. Mm-hmm. And then Lucy Shaw is one of my favorite poets, and she has a book called The Green Earth. I mean, she's got a bunch. She's got like 40 books, but that would be a good place to start because she is very much like my wife, telling you to stop and let's look at this flower and really spend time.
Well, at the end of this, I wanted to just open it up a little bit and talk a little bit about classical Christian education and beauty, and maybe where classical Christian schools are doing the right things and maybe where there's still some growth that we need to have in classical Christian education. Now, many, many years ago, there was a survey done, and that survey said basically something like this: when it comes to theology, history, and literature, classical Christian schools know what they want to do. They love the things that they're doing, and they would fight to the death to continue to do what they're doing. When it came to math and science, it found that back in those days, we didn't know why we were doing what we were doing, but we must be good because our test scores are great. But then when it got down to music and art, I know that was the most frightening part of the survey for us, because the classical Christian schools at that point said, we're not really sure why we're doing it, and if we have to cut something, this would be the first thing that we would cut.
Of course.
Now, what's been interesting to me over the 25 years, that was almost 25 years ago, over the 25 years, we have seen cuts in the arts, but not really at classical Christian schools. At just about all of the other schools in our culture, they're just slashing the arts. What should a school be looking to do to really become addicted to beauty?
Well, I think that for one thing that you've just basically done a great commercial for another book that my book publishing company did called Teaching Beauty, about classical education and the arts. We did that several years ago now. But I think that one of the things is, I keep saying slow down. There's a slow down-ness to it. My daughter was talking the other day about how she never learned to draw, that she would have art classes and she'd learn how to mix colors or different. What she was saying basically, though she wouldn't put in these words, is that there was a arts and crafts approach to art, and we need to have an art approach to art. I would say that it's very important that you just teach people to draw. There's a book that I used in college called Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain, and it teaches you how to draw. And I think that if students went through that every year, that probably would be better than most of the things they do in art, because the process of drawing is a process of slowing down. It's a process of observing, and it's focus. I think that the music teacher here, Alyssa Choden, she's the same kind of mentality, that there's this aspect of teaching these basics that, we could all just go sing a song in a circle and that would be fun, but let's teach you the basics. And I think that if we can learn just to draw, that would be a great thing in all these different areas, to just have that, because it's attentiveness.
Yeah, and here at Veritas, as we just acquired a facility this last year, I think it's important to me that now that we have a facility, just thinking through, how can we do this aspect of it more beautifully? How can we put in place things that help our students bless the learning process by being beautiful?
Well, honestly, I think the gauntlet has been kind of thrown down, and you threw the gauntlet down yourself when you bought this building. That I think that before then, you were renting a space, and so there was an excuse. It looks the way it looks because it's out of our control. And now you don't have that luxury anymore. And you're planning on expanding and growing this property, this is a scary, scary time. Like, you're going to look around and say, well, Costco works really well, so let's make a big Costco building, and we'll call that Veritas Academy. And you'll have lots of people say, well,
but you wouldn't come to it.
I wouldn't come to it. No. But most of the people would say, oh, that's a good idea. I remember I went to the Christian Academy down in Brookhaven, which I think is a classical school now. It wasn't then. I remember we built a building, and we moved in when I was in the 6th grade. And it was basically Costco mixed with some kind of, I don't know, Russian constructivist thing. Oh. That's like, can we have more cinder block and rubber? But you realize everyone around you is saying that's a good idea, that this is economical, this is efficient, all these kinds of things. And when I look at this property, I say, how inefficient can we be? Because we need to create a place that's a waste. My favorite analogy for almost everything is the greenhouse. A greenhouse doesn't make a lot of sense. It's all glass walls. From a practical standpoint, you're going to have to keep replacing those windows because they're going to get broken. But that's how things grow. And I think that when you look at this property, you have to think of it that way.
Well, yeah, and you and I have been to Florence. Beauty's economical over the long run. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing as saying your students, you're trying to train them to be
happy 80-year-olds.
Happy 80-year-olds. You have talked to my kids about, we could buy H&M clothes, or we could go to a store that actually makes clothes that's going to last more than one season. And it's a different way of thinking. But those are decisions that you have to be willing to make, and you have to say, well, I have to think 3 years ahead of time because I might not want like reflective gold shoes in 3 years. Those are decisions that you have to make thinking long term. And that's what ideally at the best classical Christian education should be doing, because it at least has been told that this is a good idea. Whether we act on that or not is our opportunity.
Yeah. Amen, Ned. So thank you so much for coming out and for talking to us about beauty and how we can cultivate beauty in our own lives and in the lives of our family and children. Thank you. So friends, if you enjoyed the Cultivate podcast today, I'd encourage you to go out and subscribe. Please share it with friends that you think would enjoy it, because we want to get these conversations out to as many people as possible who can benefit from them. It's been such a blessing to be with you today, and thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Leola, Pennsylvania. If you would like to learn more about Veritas, please visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.